You're listening to True News. I am Dr. David Berman, filling in for Rick Wiles. I'm so glad you joined me today. You know, Nelson Mandela recently died, and there has been an outcry of support for his so-called legacy. World leaders are lauding him as an international hero, a healer of the racial divide, and a captain of justice and forgiveness. But is he really what we're being told? Joining me today is a man who has suffered for the gospel, a man who knows what he's talking about concerning South Africa and Nelson Mandela. Dr. Peter Hammond is a missionary who has pioneered evangelistic outreaches in war zones of Mozambique, Angola, and Sudan, traveled hundreds of thousands of miles to deliver Bibles to persecuted Christians in Africa and Eastern Europe. In the course of his missionary activities, Peter has been ambushed, come under aerial and artillery bombardments, been stabbed, shot at, beaten by mobs, arrested, and imprisoned. For over 26 years, Peter has been dedicated to assisting persecuted Christians and to working for reformation and revival in Africa, serving both white and black people. We're going to take a break right now, but stay with us because we're going to be back with Dr. Peter Hammond, a very interesting man.
Reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is True News.
This is Max McLean. Confession is acknowledging our disobedience and returning to God in faith that leads to obedience. Listen to the Bible from Nehemiah 1. O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you. I confess the sins we have committed against you. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. From Nehemiah 1. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Joining me today is Dr. Peter Hammond. We're going to speak about Nelson Mandela, and it's really a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Hammond. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be on the program.
And I'm talking to you. You're in South Africa right now.
Yes, I am. Cape Town, South Africa, the very southernmost tip of African continent.
Okay, so listen, there's a lot of sort of in America. Now, I've never been to South Africa, so I'm going to talk about America right now. And I know sort of all around the world, this kind of idea that Nelson Mandela is this incredibly huger than life figure who's a great and a marvelous hero. And in fact, Barack Obama said, and I quote from the President of the United States, said, I quote, I cannot fully imagine my own life, without the example of Nelson Mandela. So long as I live, I will do what I can to learn from him, end quote. That's what Barack Obama said. And of course, we got, world leaders all over that are lauding him as, really the human rights, protector, the hero of civil rights. And it's interesting because, I'm not sure that we're getting the full story. I mean, is he the hero that they say he is?
Well, no, I believe that the first thing we need to be very alert to is the fact that the scriptures warn us not to be deceived. And God is truth, and God's word is truth, and Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And in the Bible we read that Satan is deceiving the nations, and it speaks about at the end, Satan will be bound so that he might deceive the nations no more. And regularly there are references to Satan who deceives the whole world. So if we find ourselves in agreement with the United Nations and Hollywood and the mass media, then we must know we've been deceived. And I'm an African. I was born in Cape Town, South Africa. I was raised in Rhodesia, what today is Zimbabwe. I've spent my whole life in Africa. I'm now 53 years old. I've been a missionary for 36 years, and I've spent my life serving the black people of Africa, serving in the most dangerous areas as far afield as Mozambique and Angola and Sudan and Nigeria and the Congo and Zimbabwe. And I've been in prison with the Marxists. I've been tortured for my faith. I've been bombed at church services. So I know Africa, and I've met Nelson Mandela. In fact, when he was president, he summoned me to his presidential mansion for an hour of face-to-face discussion because I'd been marching people outside his parliament to protest his policies. And so I've confronted Nelson Mandela on many of these issues. I'm not speaking behind his back because I said the same things to him that I'm going to say now. Nelson Mandela is a communist, and that's been confirmed now that he's died. After 50 years of deception, the South African Communist Party and the African National Congress have admitted Nelson Mandela has always been a member of the Communist Party of South Africa, the SA Communist Party, and he's been a senior member of the Politburo of the Southern Communist Party. But they kept that secret because of the negative perspective many people had of communism. So that's the first thing. They have for 50 years lied about the fact that he is a communist, and yet entered into the record of the Supreme Court where he was being tried in 1964 was a handwritten document, 65 pages, by Nelson Mandela, how to be a good communist. And he didn't contest it. He's a lawyer. He's trained as a lawyer. And Nelson Mandela pleaded guilty to the 156 charges of violence and sabotage and revolution and terrorism. So as a lawyer, he knows what pleading guilty is. And so the perspective being created today is that Nelson Mandela was some poor, innocent human rights activist who had trumped-up charges against him, and he was accused of things that he wasn't guilty of, and he was locked up for just what he thought, and he hadn't done anything wrong, and he hadn't hurt anyone, but that's just not true, because Nelson Mandela...
Let me ask you a question, if I may. Now, the other, of course, the other side of that, they would say, is, well, he coerced into that admission of, admitting to guilt to these things. That's what some of his supporters would say. That he was coerced by the government to say that he committed these crimes.
But that's not possible, because if one's read his book, Long Walk to Freedom, on which this recent movie, the authorized biopic, Long Walk to Freedom, Mandela Long Walk to Freedom, which is just being released right now. According to the film and according to the book, which it's based on, Mandela said, yes, we did these acts of sabotage. Yes, we wanted violent revolution. We wanted to break down law and order. We wanted to overthrow the government by sabotage and violent revolution. And so he admitted it in his speech at the time before the court, and this film revels in the fact that he says that he pleaded guilty to these charges, and he said, this is a cause for which I'm willing to die. And that's big and bold. So if anyone says he was coerced into it, that's not true. The state never required him to do anything but plead not guilty. He chose to plead guilty.
So then let me ask you another question, if I may. And again, I'm not suggesting I know one way or the other, because I don't. I'm asking you because you do. Some would say, well, what's the difference between Nelson Mandela or any other what they would call freedom fighter who was fighting for freedom if he did violence? What is the difference?
Well, the first thing to ask is, does freedom follow? And, for example, I can see that from your founding fathers, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and others, that freedom followed. And the American War of Independence was not a revolution in an exact sense. The French Revolution was a revolution. The Russian Revolution was a revolution. Yep. I believe it's wrong to call what happened in America a revolution. It was America's War of Independence.
Exactly.
And your people, your founding fathers, were plainly fighting for freedom. And there was no guillotine, there was no mass executions, there was no massacres like there was in France or Russia. America fought for freedom in a military way and didn't target civilians. And afterwards, people were free. And so you can see those people were true freedom fighters. Now, I have been involved with fights for freedom in Africa. I've been heavily involved with the SPLA, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army in Sudan, who have been fighting for over 50 years for freedom from Arab northern Sudan, from Sharia law. And the Christian black south of Sudan achieved its freedom just over 2 years ago, and the youngest country in the world is South Sudan. And we were part of that. I was there in the bush training their chaplains, training their medics, doing evangelism, Bible distribution amongst these persecuted Christians while we were being bombed by the Sudan Air Force. I would say the people in South Sudan were fighting for freedom, and freedom has come since the independence. So it's not that I'm against people who are fighting to defend their homes from slave raiders and from aerial bombardment and terrorism. I know what freedom is. I've seen that, but I've also seen what oppression is. I've worked behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe and smuggled Bibles to the Christians in Romania and East Germany, in Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Bulgaria and Albania, Yugoslavia. I remember what oppression was, and I remember the excitement as the people got freedom in Eastern Europe as the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. The thing about South Africa is, if you are from a distance and you just see the official report, the impression you get is that the situation in South Africa was absolutely evil and oppressive, and there was this wonderful man, Nelson Mandela, who brought freedom and deliverance to his people and was magnanimous and generous and gracious and forgave his persecutors and oppressors, and they all lived happily ever after. And that would be very nice if that was true. And I've seen Invictus, the film that Clint Eastwood put out on Nelson Mandela, and I've seen this film last week that's just come out, Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. And I live in this country, and I've met Nelson Mandela, and I was in the townships when these violence was taking place. And I must say, these films are dishonest. They are not giving the context, they're not giving the perspective, and the story they're giving, it's disinformation. It's not even misinformation, it's disinformation. It's not actually enlightening people on the reality, it's actually deceiving people, and I think that's unacceptable.
Well, that really is the question, isn't it? I think the way you described what a freedom fighter is a wonderful explanation, because I too believe in fighting for freedom. But if you have the end of freedom, so-called, in a freedom's revolution, turn out to be a Marxist leader, we don't call that freedom, at least not where I'm from. Well, I heard I heard a television personality here. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a big television personality named Bill O'Reilly here in America on Fox News. Yes. And he said, this is what he said, Nelson Mandela was a great man. He was a communist, but he was a great man. And I watched this, and I looked at the television, and I thought to myself, how can you put communist and great man in the same sentence? Now, let us be clear about this. At least in America, the political correctness is so off the charts that there has to be this, because Nelson Mandela fought in the minds of Americans to free black people from apartheid and bad treatment, then that means that he's a wonderful man. But the question is, are things better? Not that I support apartheid or any kind of discrimination, because I absolutely do not. But the question is, what are things like now? What's it like for people who supposedly are supposed to be fighting for freedom? What is it like?
Well, that's certainly the question one needs to ask, and let me make it crystal clear that nobody on your listeners doubt it. I am not a racist. I have spent my life serving and working for black people throughout the continent as a missionary. And our mission's been multiracial from the beginning. We got into trouble with the old apartheid government for having multiracial church camps back in the early 1980s when that was actually illegal. And we were closed down and chased away from our very first camp of our mission over 30 years ago. So our mission has been working throughout the continent, smuggling in Bibles, medicines, love boxes to people who are some of the most persecuted and suffering Christians in the continent at great risk. Now, I met Nelson Mandela, and let me say why I've got problems with a lot of what's happened in a few words, and then explain what happened when we met. Nelson Mandela, when he became president, he spoke about reconciliation and all that, which sounded nice, and he spoke about he didn't want black domination or white domination. He wanted freedom and equality for everyone. Well, gee, that sounds great, and I'm all for that too. But the first thing he did was he legalized abortion and pornography. Today, over 1 million South Africans, mostly black children, have been killed through abortion legally. So Nelson Mandela, who Bill O'Reilly calls a great man, legalized abortion in our country, and he didn't just sign it. He sponsored it. He initiated it. He promoted it against all opposition. South Africans are very conservative people generally in terms of morals and religion.